Everybody's. Let's today start with module 10. Module 10 talks about formulation and implementation of strategy. So let's start with 10.1. 10.1 is a very key chapter in your module because it talks about various strategies. It talks about strategy formulation. So various strategies that we would be discussing in this video would be on production strategy, supply chain strategy, marketing strategy, and human resource strategy, that is HR. Right. So four strategies we'll be discussing. Let's start with the production first. Production strategy, what it is all about. Production system is concerned with capacity, location, layout, product or service design, work systems, degree of automations and such factors. So when we talk about product system, what basically product system includes, it's very logical. So if you just think from a manufacturing company perspective, you would see that it talks about the capacity which the company has to produce its output, the location where it is based, whether it is very easily accessible to the supply chain or whether it is in a far off location. So depending on that, basically the production strategy will be designed, the layout of the company, what kind of product or service they basically are into, and it's designing also the work systems, how it is operational, on what basis does it function. So that needs to be taken care of. Degree of automation, because we are in a world wherein everything is being automated, so that also plays a very significant part, and other such factors. Right now, plans and policies pertaining to this strategy deal with issues affecting the capability of the organization to achieve its objectives. So basically, what are its skill set, its expertise, what is the kind of knowledge level that the employees have, plays a very vital role. For what? For eventually attaining the objectives of the organization. So plans and policies pertaining to the strategy deal is very important. Then strategy implementation should lay emphasis on production system factors. Now what exactly is this? Any decision pertaining to it would have lasting influence on the operations capability of an organization and its ability to implement strategies and achieve objectives. So net whatever we talk about, you would eventually see that the basic purpose of any kind of strategy is to basically achieve the objectives of the organization, and what are the various strategies that needs to be implemented. We'll read this point once again. It's strategy implementation should lay emphasis on production system factors. Right? Why? Because any decisions that is relevant to it would have a lasting influence, or it will have a significant impact on the operations capability of an organization and its ability to implement strategies and achieve objectives. Now, production strategy determines how and where a product or service is manufactured, levels of vertical integration on production process, deployment of physical resources and relation with suppliers. Right? So when we talk about production strategies, it determines what, how and where a product or service is manufactured. So basically the location and what will be the skill set or the idea, or what basically is the technology that would be used to produce a product or service. Levels of vertical integration. What exactly you mean by vertical integration? It simply means basically the company takes the ownership of two or more stages of its supply chain. Say for example manufacturing and distributing, rather than depending on an external supplier. So that's what all vertical integration is about, right? So vertical integration is basically culmination of two or more skill sets which the company employs or deploys itself rather than depending on the external supplier, right? Then deployment of physical resources. That means optimum utilization of resources. How efficiently you are using it and where exactly you are deploying it. Deploying does means that where exactly you are allocating it. And relation with the suppliers, which is very important. If the relations with supplier is not good, or it's not very healthy, then in that case you would be missing out on the input, and which would affect which would rather at a later point in time can hamper your production strategy, right? So these points are very important. So please keep in mind, when we talk about production strategy, you have to take into consideration how and where a product or service is manufactured, the levels of vertical integration of production process, deployment of physical resources and the relation with your suppliers, right? Then deals with optimum level of technology that firm should use in its operation processes. So it's very important or very pivotal to understand what is the optimum level of technology that should be using. That you have to strike a balance between the human interference and the technology that you are using. You cannot be over dependent on anything. So you have to make sure there is a level of technology also that is optimum, which is maintained by the organization with respect to the operation processes. Now, increasing competition in many industries have compelled companies to switch from traditional mass production using dedicated transfer lines to a continuous improvement production strategy, right? So basically it's a migration from, say, a traditional mass production by using what? Transfer lines. What exactly you mean by transfer lines? It's basically a high volume production system where parts are moved through automated workstation. Now we can take an example of cold drink. Now you would have seen whenever a cold drink is being manufactured, first the drink is manufactured, thereafter it is being refilled in the bottle or rather filled in the bottle, then it's being capped, and finally it is being sent to the distribution part, right? So you would see this is all being automated, so it happens one by one. So first you manufacture the cold drink, then it is being bottled, then it is being capped, and eventually it goes to the market for the supply, right? So that's what it talks about. So increasing competition in many industries have compelled means it has forced the companies to switch from what? Traditional mass production. So as we discussed in the last point also, it's very important for you to strike a balance between the automation as well as the human interference. So when you strike the balance, in that case you have to make a change from a traditional mass production using what? Dedicated transfer lines. Dedicated transfer lines is something I have explained with the example of cold drink, to a continuous improvement production strategy. So that there has to be a continuity and there shouldn't be a break, which eventually will improve your production strategy, right? Then we talk about mass production system. Mass production system, which was an efficient way to produce large number of low cost standard goods and services, right? So what are the key features of mass production system? First of all, workers are expected to learn work assigned to them, right? And learning how to do better was the sole prerogative of the management. Prerogative is simply you can say it's a priority of the management. So whenever you talk about a mass production system, in that you have to see, or rather you have to monitor whether the workers are working up to the mark. So how would they work up to the mark? Only when they are basically given proper training programs. Their learning should be good enough, and hence that should be the priority of the management, because that eventually will increase the efficiency of the organization. Quality is relatively low. Why? Because as employees work on a narrowly defined repetitious task under the supervision of bureaucratic and hierarchical structure. So basically the scope is very limited. They would stick to their own work. They won't go beyond the job or the role assigned to them. Why? Because there is the role they have is very narrowly defined. Since you have a lot of control of the management over you, so you don't tend to expand your horizon, right? So it's basically first of all very repetitious in nature, and since it is under the supervision of bureaucratic or the hierarchical structure, you basically are not let to share your ideas, or rather you basically your ideas are suppressed, and hence your growth becomes very narrow. So that's one of the negative aspects of mass production system. Then under the continuous improvement system, companies empower cross-functional teams to continuously strive to improve production processes, right? What exactly is a cross-functional team? Cross-functional team simply means basically a group of people with diverse skills or expertise coming together from different departments. For what? For eventually attaining the organizational objective, right? So under the continuous improvement system, what happens is companies basically empower, or they basically give them some kind of authority to whom? To the cross-functional team. For what? For continuously striving, or rather continuously improving the production processes, right? Then you talk about managers are more of a coach than a boss. So managers basically have to be a guiding force rather than just bossing around, right? They should not just give you instructions. They should themselves get on to the grassroots level and tell the employees this is what is supposed to be done, and they basically do it on an operational level. They coach them, and eventually the work is being executed. So this results in what? This results in superior quality, and not only on standard goods and services at a lower cost, right? Finally, you talk about success of continuous improvement. How continuous improvement can be a successful or rather a successful venture. This can be it can be successful only by the recognition of workers. So whosoever is doing a good work, you basically have to appreciate them, or rather you should reward them. And basically it's all about recognition of workers' experience and knowledge that can help managers for what? For solving the production problems and contribute to tightening variances and reducing errors. So if there is any kind of discrepancy or there is any kind of error, that can be reduced only through the recognition of workers' experience, because they are the ones who are working on the grassroots level. So any problem which is there, it's easier for them to decode it rather than a manager rather realizing it, right? So that's how continuous improvement can be a successful venture, right? So basically I have explained this with the help of an diagram. You can have a look at it. This would summarize the entire production strategy that we have just discussed. Continuous improvement production cycle basically depends on assessing the production system. So you basically evaluate current capacity, location and layout, fine. Then you implement continuous improvement. You basically empower teams to enhance processes. This can be done through rendering training skill, or other you making the employees learn fast. Then coach management, as we have already discussed, the managers should not boss around, rather they should be a coach. So managers acts as coaches and not bosses. Then you recognize the workers expertise. So you need to value the workers experience and knowledge, because that would eventually help you to reduce the variances and the errors, and you achieve superior quality. So you focus on high quality low cost production, fine. Then you come to the next part, which talks about the supply chain strategy, right? So first what we have learned is, first we have learned production strategy. Now we would be discussing the supply chain strategy, right? So what the supply chain strategy talks about? Supply chain strategy basically refers to managing flow of inputs and components from supplier into company's production processes. So you basically procuring the inputs and the various components from the market, and you basically infusing into the company's production process. For what? To minimize inventory holding, so that you don't hold a lot of inventory, and basically you maximize the inventory turnover. So your production becomes faster. You just keep the inventory that is required for production process, and eventually you basically produce the goods and services according to that, fine. So that is supply chain strategy all about. So logistics is very important when we talk about this strategy. Now what exactly is logistics? It is a process of planning and executing efficient transportation and storage of goods from point of origin to the point of consumption, right? So logistics simply means two things are very important when we talk about logistics. One is transportation and the second one is storage. So basically efficient handling of transportation and storage is basically called as logistics, fine. So logistics is equally important in this strategy. For what? For boosting the efficiency of a company. Sorry, right? Then we talk about what? Materials management. Now materials management basically includes what? It includes the activities necessary to get inputs and components to production facility, right? So whatever activities are undertaken for bringing the inputs and components to the production facility is called as a material management, right? This is done through what? Through production process and out in the market through a distribution system to the end user. So when it is coming into the market, coming into the company, it is through the production process, and it is out in the market through what? Through the distribution system to the end user. Now potential for reducing cost through efficient material management strategies is enormous. So basically if you have to basically reduce the cost through the supply chain management or through efficient material management, then that becomes a very useful tool to reduce the cost structure, fine. Now in a competitive market, reducing material cost by 3% is relatively easier than increasing sales revenue by 30%. You know, there are a lot of players in the market who are competing. So ideally you should try to reduce the material cost, right, rather than increasing the revenue. So as an example, it is given that reducing the material cost by 3% is relatively easier than basically increasing your sales by 30%, fine. Now efficiency of materials management can be improved by adopting something we have already learned before, which is called as just in time. You all would be knowing what exactly is just in time. Still we would try to learn it. So basically efficiency of material management can be improved by adopting something called as just in time inventory system. The system was designed to what? To economize inventory holding costs by scheduling components to arrive at a manufacturing plant just in time to enter production process, or goods to arrive at retail store when stock is at the verge of depletion. So you know, basically you are into production process and your inventory is just on the verge of getting over. That means it is just on the brink of getting over. In that case, exactly you would tell your supplier, so basically to give the to supply the inputs or the components in time. So that's what is just in time all about, fine. Now major cost cutting comes from increasing inventory turnover, eventually reducing inventory holding cost, warehouse and storage cost, and companies working capital needs. So major cost cutting when you talk about supply chain strategy or the materials management comes from increasing inventory turnover. That means basically you keep on selling as and when you are producing, and this would, what it would do is it basically will eventually reduce the inventory holding cost. What exactly is holding cost? Your warehouse cost or the storage cost, and the company's working capital needs. So net you can say that just in time is very important as far as the supply chain strategy is concerned, right? So what are the various components of supply chain strategy? Have a look at this diagram. You would be able to summarize it in a beautiful way. First of all, inventory management. Inventory management basically focuses on minimizing holding cost and maximizing turnover. Then logistics, which involves the movements of goods and involves the movement and storage of goods efficiently. Materials management ensures component reach production and market effectively. Just-in-time system arranges for timely arrival of goods to reduce excess inventory, and cost reduction, which aims at lowering costs through efficient management strategies. So if you remember all these points, rather than learning the entire para out here, if you simply remember these key points, that's more than sufficient for you to explain the supply chain strategy. So what are the various points? First of all, you talk about inventory management. Second one is logistics. Third one is material management. Fourth one is just-in-time system. And fifth one, basically, you concentrate on the cost reduction point, right? Now, what are the various limitations of JIT? That is just-in-time. Okay. Now, it leaves a company without a buffer stock of inventory. You don't have any surplus, right? So whenever you want, you basically ask for it. So ultimately, you don't have any buffer. Buffer means something which is extra, fine. Although buffer stocks are expensive, still they can help a company prepare for shortages on inputs brought by disruption among suppliers. Example, labor dispute at suppliers' place, and can help a company respond quickly to increase in demand. Now, what can happen is, if for example, supplier, there is a strike in their office, fine, and you are depending on just in time. Now, in that case, buffer stock can be a handy thing, because if there is a strike over there and there is no production, or there is a logistical strike, in that case your company will be affected. So it is good to have a bit of buffer. Although JIT is a very beautiful feature because that can reduce your inventory cost, but from the production process point of view, it is very important to have a buffer stock. So that is one limitation of JIT. So let's understand what are the various pros and cons of JIT through this diagram. Pros are basically it can reduce holding costs, already discussed. It can increase efficiency because you get it, you immediately produce, and you have a higher inventory turnover, and there is less of wastage, right? That's but obvious. But what are the various cons? Basically, you don't have buffer stock. So if there is an exigency and you got to produce goods or services, you basically can take a hit. Goods, not exactly services, but goods, right? You're vulnerable to supplier distribution. So if, for example, strike, that's the best example you can remember of. If there is a strike, then in that case, that can hit the production of your company. And slower response to demand spikes. Now, for example, there is a very sudden spike in the demand of your goods, and your supplier has limited capacity. Because you're dependent on your supplier, you're not able to procure more goods. So basically that can lead to slow response to demand spike. So that is one more cons of, or rather the disadvantage of JIT, right? Now, how do you overcome the limitations of JIT? You, rather than depending on just one supplier for an integral input, company might decide to source inputs from multiple suppliers. Because you have a dependency on just one particular supplier, that can take a hit. So ideally you should try to have more suppliers from whom you produce or you procure the goods and services, right? Change management techniques to help employees adjust to new processes and procedures, right? So your employees should be easily adapting the new processes and procedures. This includes what? This includes communication and engagement plans, training and education programs, right? So your adaptability of employees makes a lot of difference. Advanced technology such as real-time inventory tracking. So basically your system should have a mechanism wherein they can really on real-time basis they can track the inventory. So if it is coming down, system automatically tracks it and updates it, and you accordingly take measures for procuring the components or the inputs. And data analysis. So these are the two things that are very important. It can support JIT implementation by providing visibility into inventory levels, production schedules, and customer demand, right? So basically this can support JIT implementation. How? By providing visibility into inventory levels. So you have a track of what exactly your inventory levels are, production schedules, on what basis, or the schedules you follow for the production system, and the customer demands, fine. Businesses should implement what? Robust quality control measures and regularly monitor their effectiveness to produce high quality product consistently. So basically business should always ensure they have a good quality control measure mechanism, and they are regularly monitoring the effectiveness for producing high quality products on a consistent basis. Now focus should be on how efficiently resources are utilized, right? So ideally you should see that there is an optimum utilization of resources, there is less of wastage, and in what manner the day-to-day operation can be managed with respect to attainment of long-term objectives. So these are basically various steps through which you can overcome the limitations of GIT, right? Simply understand with this figure. Basically you got to cut down on one supply dependence from one particular supplier. You should have multiple suppliers to make your job easier. If there is, why? Because this can have a there may be a supply chain disruption, or there is always a single supplier risk. For example, a single supplier just backs off. In that case, you will be in trouble. Now, how can you overcome? Basically, you shouldn't have a resistance to change. So your employee should be able to adapt to the changes easily. How that can be done? That can be given by giving various training needs, and these are part of the management system, or rather a change management. Then there should be a good technology implementation. That can be done through what? Inventory visibility or inventory monitoring, real-time monitoring, what we spoke about. That can be done through data analysis, and finally monitoring effectiveness or quality measures or through quality control. So these three things are important to overcome the limitations of GAT. So if you just simply look at this figure, note down these points, more than sufficient for you to explain the overcoming of GAT implementation, right? Then we come to something called as a marketing strategy, right? So we have done three. First is production strategy, then we have discussed the supply chain strategy. Now we would be discussing the marketing strategy. Now what exactly is marketing strategy? It refers to a position that a company takes with respect to market segmentation. Whether you are catering to luxury goods, or for example you are catering to the rural population. So that's what is market segmentation all about. Then pricing needs to be taken into consideration, promotion activities that you undertake to promote your products, advertising, product design and distribution, right? So that's what all are part and parcel of marketing strategies. What exactly you need to remember? It refers to a position that a company takes. So what exactly position a company takes with respect to what? With respect to the market segmentation, pricing, market segmentation, pricing, promotion, advertising, product design and distribution, right? So these are the points which you need to take into account when you talk about the marketing strategy. Now marketing strategy can have a major impact on what? On efficiency and cost structure of a company. Fine. One of the important aspects of this concept is relationship of customer defection rates, cost structure and unit cost. Please remember this customer defection rate when you talk about the marketing strategy. Very, very important, right? Second thing is cost structure and the unit cost, like per item what cost are you incurring, right? Now what exactly is a customer defection rate? Customer defection, you can also call it as a churn rate. Churn rate means turnaround rate. Fine. The percentage of customers who defect every year to competitors. Defect means you move on from your company to the other company. For example, simple example can be that of HUL and say Godrej Consumer. Fine. So if for example HUL is producing a soap, now for some reasons this customer has been with HUL for say 5 years. Suddenly he realizes the fragrance of the soap, or for that matter the quality of the soap, has deteriorated. So what he does is he moves to the Godrej Consumer, and you start using soaps of this company. So that is called as a defection rate, moving of customer from HUL to Godrej, right? I guess you understand. So basically the percentage of customers who basically defect every year. Defect means moving from one company to the another, is basically called as a customer defection rate. So in marketing strategy, you basically focus a lot of you lay a lot of emphasis on this point. Now defection rate determined by customer loyalty. Loyalty, yeah, obviously the longer they stay with the company, the more loyal they are to the company, which in turn is a function of the ability of company to satisfy its customer. Now how can you basically enjoy the customer loyalty? That you can do only by consistently maintaining the quality of your product and making sure your customer stays only with your company. Fine. Now acquiring of new customers often attracts one-time fixed cost. It's a one-time fixed cost. So if you basically acquire a new customer, there is a one-time fixed cost that is there, as there is a direct relationship between defection rate and the cost. advertising and promotion designed to attract new customers. That's very obvious. Unless and until you give it, see, if there is an existing customer, they would keep on coming to you. They won't focus too much of emphasis on the advertising or the promotion strategy. But if you got to attract a new subscriber or the new customer, in that case, you have to make sure that you advertise your product or you promote your product. Right, so that's basically a very important tool when it comes to marketing strategy. It's good to have the existing customers in your kitty rather than basically trying to acquire new subscribers every other time. So if you maintain the quality, that can basically increase the loyalty of the customers. At the same time, there can be a good word of mouth which basically can attract new customers also. But in case you want to acquire new ones, then obviously advertising and promotion plays a very important role. Right? Longer a company retains a customer, greater the volume of customer generated unit sales and lower the average unit cost of each sale. Right? Because your advertising cost automatically comes down, so that basically lowers the average unit cost of each sale, and basically the volume of customer generated unit sales will be high, because consistently you see there is a customer sticking around with the company, so that automatically will increase the revenue of the organization. Right? Thus, lower the defection rate, lower the cost structure. So lower the customers moving from your company to the other, basically you can maintain a lower cost structure which can eventually be profitable for the company. If a company can reduce defection rates, it can make a better return on its investment in acquiring customers and eventually boosting profitability. That's what we have discussed. Another benefit of long-time customer loyalty is free advertising that the customers provide for a company. As I said, word of mouth. If basically your product is good, a customer is sticking to a very long period of time, so they would recommend other people also to switch over to your company. So obviously that's a free advertisement, which again is lower in cost, and eventually that can help you improve your sales as well as your profitability. Loyal customers can increase the business volume through referrals. That's what is the summary of this entire part. Right? Now basically we can try to understand this marketing strategy with the help of a diagram. Basically, customer defection rates, percentage of customers leaving for competitors annually. So that's how you define a customer defection rate. So that is what is an integral part of marketing strategy. Cost structure, expenses related to customer acquisition and retention. Customer loyalty, what exactly is that? Customer retention influenced by the satisfaction level. Unit sales, volume of sales generated per customer over time. And finally the profitability, it talks about financial gains from reduced defection and increased loyalty. Right. With this, we finished marketing strategy. So 3 things we have discussed: today's production process, production strategy, supply chain. GIT was very important when we spoke about the supply chain, and finally we have discussed about marketing strategy. Now we are only left with HR strategy that we would be discussing in the next video. Right. Thanks for joining and keep learning.